Shalom and welcome to another edition of Parasha Talk. I'm Rabbi Elliot Malamet in Highland Park, New Jersey, at the Highland Park Conservative Temple Congregation Anshe Amen, and joining me my good friends, Rabbi Barry Chesler, Solomon Schechter Day School, Long Island, and Rabbi Jeremy Kalmanovsky at the Anshe Chesed in New York City. I was in your shul last week. Had such
I heard that
time with the cantorial recital. Big shout out to Joshua Ehrlich. And it was an amazing. You got nice gigs there. Nice shul. Beautiful.
And you see that grand piano that was sitting there on the bima? Wasn't that amazing?
Unbelievable. It was just a gorgeous evening, lots of music. And
hey, do you know that the of the three graduating cantorial students, one of them, was our cantorial intern here. One is Josh Ehrlich, who you've known for many years and we've known from camp. And the other woman, Marilyn Akoshi, you remember her sons, Ethan and Jacob, they were both
yeah. Just it's great. And of course, well, what a great theme. Music, song, the Song of the Sea. The Song of the Sea is the centerpiece of our Parsha this week, because this week is known as Shabbat Shirah. Shabbat Shirah, precisely because of the Song of the Sea. We'll get to it in a second, but just we have to just get the context here. Bnei Israel have left Egypt. They've baked matzah the day after they left Egypt. They arrive, and they're taking a circuitous route. Vayhi b'shalach Paro et ha'am. When Pharaoh sent the people out, God did not let them go the way of the land of the Philistines. He does not allow them to go on the coastal route, which would have been the easier route, maybe take a couple of days and walk up the coast. The coastal route was highly fortified. Birotam pen yinachem ha'am birotam milchama, since he was concerned that the people would regret or change their minds, having being exposed to perhaps some embattlements, and they would want to return, which of course is one of the themes in the story. Go ahead, Barry.
It's a perplexing thing, though, because the contention of the Torah is that they will see war, but they come out armed, right? They're chamushim, which most commentators understand as being armed, and instead they go the Derech Yam Suf, where God will do the battle for them, because God, in that arresting image that so many people find problematic from the song, is Ish Melchama.
So interesting, because by the end of the Bible, by the end of the Torah, in Bamidbar, you go in the last chapters of Bamidbar, and it's one war after another war after another war. And of course, it's a different people. These are the people that are coming out of Egypt, and those are the people going into the land of Israel. And people coming out of Egypt, they're broken. The mental state, the spiritual state, the physical state is a state of brokenness, I think.
I want to add something slightly different. It's not just that they're broken, they're children. They're immature. They're petulant. They complain like 5 and 6 year olds. It's too hot. I remember some scenes from when my children were younger. The things that now they laugh about were unbearable at a younger age. And that's how Bnei Israel is.
Are they ready for their journey? I mean, is this what the story is about here?
They're not ready. In my old age, I more and more am taken with the miraculous nature of the Exodus. That the whole point of the Torah, I think, is that it could not be done by human beings. It could only be done by God.
Okay.
I want to just look for a second about this ki karovhu, that God did not lead them up the coastal road. Ki karovhu, ki, it was near. Now, in rabbinic interpretation, ki can mean lots of different things. It can mean if, it can mean because, it can mean behold. So you have a couple of ways of reading this. Barry was pointing in one direction. You can't lead them up the Philistines' route. You can't lead them up the coast, because they might see war, and that'll be a problem. We want to lead them someplace else. And as you pointed out, Barry, they're going to see war in those places too. So Rashi responds to this and say, the problem is, I didn't lead you up the Philistines' route, ki karohu, because it was so near that turning back would have been so easy. Like the first bad thing that's going to happen, you're going to run around home. So that's what's going to happen. You're going to fight the Amalekites. You're going to fight everybody else's. You're going to come to the Red Sea. I want to put you in sufficiently far away that you got no chance to return. That's Rashi's interpretation. It's not that they won't see war if they go the other way. They're going to see war either way. But I want to make you have sunken costs so you can't turn around. I think Ibn Ezra says it in a slightly different way. That if it's more like what you said. Ibn Ezra's position is that if I take you off in this other direction, you might not see some of those bad things. I think that this Kikarohu, although it was near God didn't lead up the road, even though it was near, or because it was too near. I think that the one way to read it, or one vibe, is didn't lead you the easy way, it led you the hard way. It's going to be more growthful, it's going to be more demanding. And I think that sort of fits overall. The book of Devarim opens up and says, it's actually 11 days, just 11 days from Egypt to the promised land. And 40 years later, you're still walking. You've got so much growth to still have happen.
Right. There's a reference, I think, in Ibn Ezra that in his commentary in Shemot, it's only 10 days. So they lost a day while they were wandering.
Uh-huh.
All right, so they're wandering and they're going back and forth, and it's if you look at some of the maps that depict the journey, it really has them zigzagging, and of course Pharaoh picks up on this and sees that they're confused and wants to chase after them. Vayidefu Mitzrayim achareim, on verse 9, Egypt chases after them. Vayasigo otam chonim alayam, and they catch up to Israel encamped on the sea. And then it tells us that they have their first crisis. Pharaoh is getting closer. Israel looked and sees Egypt coming after them. They were terribly scared. And they cry out to God. And then they cry to Moshe, Hami blien kvarim b'Mitzrayim lekachtanu lamut b'midbar. Was it for a lack of graves in Egypt that you took us to die in the desert? What did you do to us?
It was so nice. It was so nice back in Egypt. Okay, some of our babies got thrown in the river, but we were fine.
What did you do to us? Kitov lanu avod bet Mitzrayim b'mutenu b'midbar. It's better for us to serve Egypt and die in the desert. And so here, what's so great about this verse? If you were to do a great verses, this is a great verse. It's ironic. It's slightly humorous. It's very serious. It encapsulates.
Why don't you give us the verse in Mel Brooks or in Lenny Bruce or?
You
don't have enough graves in Egypt.
It's not the birth of Jewish humor, but it's close. And
what's their problem is that they don't have a concept of freedom, because we know from elsewhere in Scripture that it's better to be free than to be a slave. But they don't see it that way. They think it's better to be dead than to be free.
Well, what they can't see, and this is the incredibly rich part of this the wilderness journey of Am Yisrael. The incredibly rich part is exactly what you're saying, that they have been, we said a couple weeks ago, lo shamu Moshe mikotzer ruach. They had shortness of breath, or a little more poetically, they had very small spirits, and they didn't have the sense of what could be alternative. And so they said, listen, just leave me to serve Egypt instead of this terrible death in the wilderness. But actually, if you're going to go someplace, and if you're going to have a mission, and you're going to serve a cause, you're going to serve God, which is a better thing than serving Pharaoh, and you're going to make it to a promised land and achieve a destiny, it's going to be hard. And the people just do not, at this early stage, have any sense of the why of where they're going or what they're heading towards. They can only just see, the mire that they're stuck in at this particular moment.
So they cry out to God, and Moses gives them, I don't think, a particularly great answer. He says, don't worry, you'll see God's salvation. Okay.
No, because Moses could have gotten angry here, and he doesn't. Later in the Parsha, he's going to be very disturbed by the reaction,
Okay,
and he's
so
going to fear he's going to get stoned. This is
basically
Moses as a pastor.
he's trying to say calm down, and of course that may not be a good thing for him to say, because the very next verse God says to Moses, "Vayomer Adonai Moshe, ma titzak elai? Why are you crying out to me? Deber el bnei Yisrael v'yisau. Speak to them and go." So I would ask the theological question, which is, what's the theology here about in terms of, man, God, Moses, God, salvation, miracles, etc., or is theology off the table here? Just do it. Just go. Just do. Leave out the prayer right now. There's a time for prayer and a time for walking, and now's the time to walk. What would you?
So that, I think that's Rashi's comment that it's not the time to stop and pray. You have to go. But it does lead us to wonder, when is the best time to pray, which is not addressed here. But clearly some kind of action is necessary, because contra what I said earlier, there is a human dimension to redemption. It can't be totally passive. And therefore, Bnei Israel has to do something in order to be redeemed. They can't wait for God to do everything.
What is that? There's a great midrash that the children of Israel sort of formed four groups at this moment of crisis, and there were those people who say, okay, let's just go back to Egypt, and there are those people who say, let's commit suicide, let's just jump into the ocean and commit suicide, and there are those people who say, no, let's fight the Egyptians, and there are those people who say, let's pray to God, and Moshe sort of counteracts in that midrash, which I think appears in the Mechilta, the Mishnaic era commentary to Exodus. Moses kind of counters each one and says, listen, and each one of them is such a deep response to this crisis. I give up, I'm going to commit suicide, or I give up, let them take me prisoner, or let's just, strike out and lash out in a violent rebellion, or let's let God fix this for us. Well, all of these are, profound human responses, and none of them are the right response. The right response is figure out a way to walk forward, not into suicide, but still make the journey forward towards the destiny. And that's what Moshe has to do for the people who are ready to just give up or collapse.
Okay, so now we move to the scene of the splitting of the sea. God says to Moses, "Nitei haremet matchar, lift up the staff, unitei et yadcha, stretch out your arm on the sea, uvkaeu, and split it." The word uvkaeu, you split the sea. Livkoa, baka is also like the way you split wood. Vayavo b'nei Yisrael b'toch hayam bayabasha, so that the people of Israel, the children of Israel, go through the sea on the dry land. And it goes on and on. It tells us about the storm, and it's beyond our capability to imagine. And here I'm going to pose this question, which is, what is the role of telling us? How does the story capture our imagination? Is it even possible to imagine? And when we try to depict it visually, either in a picture or in movies, do we ever get close to this? And if it's impossible to depict, then what's the goal here of imagining this miracle? How does this miracle play out in our imaginations, I think, is what I'm asking. How does it play out for you?
So I think we have to keep, first of all, two things in mind. Number one, there are actually two explanations for the splitting of the sea. There's the magical or miraculous one where Moses lifts up his staff, and there's also the natural explanation that God caused the strong east wind, the Ruach Kadim, to blow and hold the water back. And so even at this great miracle, there's an invitation to consider that the miracle is not the overturning of the natural order itself, but the way the people respond to it right before they sing the Song of the Sea. But the other thing is that the image is a complete overturn to the natural order, because the water is held back and in effect is turned into dry land because the people have to walk through dry land, which is supposed to be wet, right? They're walking on the seabed, and the water is now appears to be dry because it's forming a wall, which we associate, I think, with brick, taking the image from the Egyptian experience with us.
Mm.
And that's the image. It's that complete natural revolution that we're supposed to think about.
So I want to. I've been thinking about this, over the week during, preparing for this parsha, and when the Torah depicts the wall on the right, which as an image is an astonishing image. I don't think of it necessarily as the image in the movie, in the Ten Commandments, where the water is like two walls like that. But I tried to imagine this like the wind is blowing at their backs, and that the force of the wind creates like a horseshoe around them. And so even though there's some water in front, they see the sides of the water, and the water is being pushed in front of them. And this is playing itself out in my imagination, because what happens is that the Egyptians come in and they enter the sea. They're entering water, okay? They're not entering dry land. In the movie, they have the Egyptians coming in on dry land. That's wrong. The Egyptians coming in on the sea, it's shallow, okay? They come in, the water is shallow enough for them to ride their horses and chariots, okay? But then it gets a little deeper. Israel is in basically a bubble. It's like they're an enclosed cocoon-like bubble. This is in my imagination.
This is how it happened?
This is how it happened. Totally.
You have to make sure you get the film developed, Elliot.
Exactly. What I'm saying is that the miracle is beyond depiction, and so therefore almost anything is possible in your imagination.
Well, except again, what I think is important to consider is that I don't get the sense reading Sefer Shemot, the book of Exodus, that the Israelites get wet. But the Midrash, of course, is that they do, because Nachshon dives in.
But then the sea
water hasn't separated yet.
So listen, our vast audience may not have all the Nachshon.
Up to like 300 people, by the way.
So Bar, why don't you tell that story, because that's a very vivid midrashic passage.
So the question is that what's going to be? They're being pursued by the Egyptians, and they're confronting the sea. And so Nachshon, who's the prince of the tribe of Judah, dives in, I think up to his neck, if I remember correctly.
It's according to the Midrash.
And then the water splits. Right, and then the water splits. Until Nachshon actually demonstrated his faith in God, the water was resistant. And once he dives in, the waters recede and everyone else can follow it.
But and it says in Israel, this is one of those verses that for which that midrash is an excellent illustration. Is that the Bnei Israel they were walking in the midst of the sea, but it was for them dry land. There was like some superhuman faith, willingness to go in. So yeah, I think that's right. They get wet. There's a couple of things that this conversation has stimulated in me. One, Barry points out quite correctly that it's kind of two explanations. One is a total miracle, and one is, Moses with the magic trick and the sea just splits. But then there's also the more comparatively more naturalistic one, which is also a miracle, that God makes a wind blow and the wind causes the sea to split. It's almost at a deep level, all the way back to the Bible. You have the Akivan and Yishmaelian, so to speak. The more mystical or the more rationalistic impulses in this tradition that that some are like, God just took over and everything was different, or the slightly more rationalistic one that says, No, stuff happens through the workings of the world, and we see a divine hand in here, but don't ask me to believe that something totally out of the realm of my experience. So I think that both of those are present in our tradition. Maimonides, for example, just loves the second one. It says God doesn't do stuff. God works through
Nature.
naturalistic means, and we recognize that in lots of Torah stories. But Elliot, then your point also stimulated me to think that in that more mystical vein, that more mythic vein, these big stories, the need that we readers or we Jews who've inherited the stories have to try to picture something beyond imagination, like whether it's the Har Sinai, whether it's the revelation at Sinai, or the manna in the desert, or the sea splitting, or all of the stuff that goes on. Like I think that one of the ways in which the Torah works so well is to stimulate us to real, free play of imagination in a way that's part of religion too, right? The part of religion that says, by the way, I'd like you to imagine what happens after you die, and I'd like you to imagine that sometime at the beginning of time it was like this and that, and at the end of the time it's going to be like that and this, and all the mythic stories that we love. Part of the reason that we love them is that they speak to us in that realm of fantasy and of imagination, and that makes the Bible great literature too.
So let me go in this direction with you, which is, we're entering an era in human history where we can depict things in virtual reality, and we're going to be getting much better at that in our lifetimes. In the next 10 to 20 years, you'll be able to put on a pair of goggles and pretend and imagine that you are there. I gave this sermon on Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur or whatever. Chayav Adam Leirot et Atzmo. That's going to be a not just a figure of speech that a person should see themselves. You're going to be able to put a pair of goggles on and do the avoda service in the temple. Okay, I guarantee within your lifetime, someone will create that kind of virtual reality. They already have it. I'm going to be in Israel in a couple of weeks, so I'm going to go to the exhibit at the Israel Museum on the Aleppo synagogue, which is a virtual reality tour of the Aleppo synagogue, which has been destroyed. And so here what I'm saying is that, is it possible, does the text demand of us to go into virtual reality, or to imagine reality, to imagine it on our own terms, and to then make it an allegory? Because there's no way that we will ever be able to imagine these experiences and live these experiences. And as much as we want, I think we crave on some level of our consciousness a reenactment. Wouldn't you like to go back in time and be, I don't know,
so just for fun here, what's the scene in the Tanakh? Who's the person in the Tanakh that if you had your virtual reality goggles or your time machine or what, like where would you go?
I'd like to go to
I would go not in the Tanakh, but to the second temple on Yom Kippur.
Okay. I would like to go to Har Moriah and kind of just be a witness. I wrote this whole play about it this year. I want to see if I was right.
I would. It's funny that I would. I think that I would pick Har Sinai, although maybe I would pick. Har Sinai obviously is Exodus 19 with all the pyrotechnics, but it's also the golden calf right after, and the reconciliation of the 13 midot. Like, I think these scenes are like the most intense. I would love to.
So it's very interesting that we all didn't choose the splitting of the sea. You know why?
This is fabulous.
It's too windy.
This is fabulous, and
I don't like the beach.
And I suggested 2 weeks ago when we were recording the finding of Moshe in the river with his name Moshe, the one who brings out of the water, that the whole story is really oriented. Moshe as a character, V'yamsheni Mimayim Rabim, says the psalm, draws me out of the wild water, draws me out of the raging water. That getting drawn through the raging water is the central part of the Exodus, or at least on some part on a literary level. And so it's big. It's really, really, really big that this is the capstone of their leaving Egypt. And yet, and I would say, by the way, this is why I feel like, this is kind of the Pesach Shavuot polarity or contrast or dialectic. Like, is it getting away from the bad, or is it getting oriented towards the good? Is it getting away from Egypt, or is it getting the Torah at Sinai? So this is great. This is huge. This is massive. This does call upon all our powers of imagination. And religiously speaking, I'm kind of more interested in Yitro than I am Beshalach.
Interesting. I think it commands a lot of imaginative attention, but it doesn't direct how we live, maybe, or does it? It's redemption, but it doesn't tell me what to do when I get up in the morning.
Well, I think it's unique, first of all. It's not an event that's going to be repeated, but we do think that Sinai can be repeated in some way. And I believe you once said about the Akedah that a bris is a kind of Akedat Yitzchak.
All right, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
So we get through the sea. They sing the song. I guess we're not going to focus on the song, other than to say what a remarkable piece of literature, what a remarkable piece of biblical poetry. If we're putting on the academic study of the Bible, this is really one of the oldest layers of the Bible. Really, one of the oldest layers, and everything kind of built up around it. Which tells
if I could throw in one little thing on this, which I have heard and makes sense to me, an idea that the Miriam song may be the oldest thing, because she just says Shula Adonai ki ga'oga asus berachor rama vayam. That's the whole thing, that Vatikach Miriam Haneviyah Achot Aharon, Miriam the sister of Aaron, Miriam the prophet, the sister of Aaron, takes the drum in her hand, and all the women come out after her with drums and dancing. Vatan lahem Miriam, and she calls to them in a antiphonal, what is that called, call and response kind of way. Sings the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously, horse and rider he hurled into the sea. Now that's of course in the long song as well, which would suggest that if the Torah, like the part that is the long song, seems like a development of the fragment that is in Miriam's.
Exactly.
So it's probably the oldest, or certainly among the oldest, along with the Song of Deborah, which is the Haftarah, which is also pretty fabulous, and like, the Song of Deborah is a little hard to figure out because it's so archaic. But the long song of 15 is also like a bit of a compound. There's like a few things that don't quite fit, and it says that it speaks as if the temple has already been built and the kings of Canaan are filled with dread. So it's very, very old, and it's a little bit cobbled together perhaps from different very, very old things.
That's right.
So it should be pointed out for our listeners that Miriam is actually the first female cantor, because she led the congregation song.
Carol Chesler is one of the Benot Miriam.
Okay, let's end on the manna note, because in this parsha, the people start complaining, as they are wont to do, and they have no food and they have nothing to drink. But we'll focus on the food. And this is the first appearance of manna, which is in chapter 16. The people are told that God will bring this. They have restrictions on it. Omer lagogola, they're supposed to collect only a certain measure of it, and that they're to bayom shishi. I'm reading verse 22. They're to get a second portion. Shnei haomer laichad, 2 omers for one person. And that's what happens, and this is the first. There's a proto Shabbat kind of experience here. Barry, I want to take your comments here that you reflected on in terms of this as beginnings, and there's a Edenesque quality to this.
So it was striking when I was reading the parsha earlier that the story of manna reminds one of the Garden of Eden, because each story has a dietary law, a prohibition about what one can eat, that on the face of it seems very easy to observe, but is almost immediately broken. And it's striking because, in the sense, the Bnei Israel was looking for a kind of Edenic moment. and they don't quite achieve it. But Elliot, your introductory words to this part reminded me that we have two kinds of bread that are part of our story here. We have matzah, which becomes the bread of freedom from last week. And we have the man, which in a sense is going to be the bread of affliction, because the people are going to sin with it and they're going to complain about it, that's all they're going to have. And it kind of reminds us, I think, that what's really important is not necessarily what we think we have, but what we actually have.
I would go in a different direction with manna. I would say that Pesach is the matzah bread, the unleavened, and manna is the Shavuot bread. It's the leavened bread. Manna, Shavuot. I
So
think
it's the bread that brings us to Sinai. It's
and
a nice image.
there are all sorts of little connections between manna and Shavuot that are not really terribly developed in our tradition. But one in particular, that there's sweetness and it's dairy-ish, and that's what you eat dairy for, and to a certain
And it's
extent,
an omer.
and it's an omer, right? So there's lots of little hints there about Shavuot in the manna.
This is, and I'll give you one more, by the way. But this is this is true. But I think Barry's point, I think, is also very well taken, because they're not, and maybe this is the intersection. Maybe where I'll go with this. Maybe the intersection of your 2 points. They do get fed as Adam and Chava are fed in the Garden of Eden, and that does keep them childlike, and they love it, but they resent it because it's lechem haklokel, this crappy, disgusting food, even though it does have all those rich associations. But when do they stop eating manna? It says when they get it here that it's ad boam al eretz no shavet, until they reach the settled land. And then in Joshua chapter 5, when they finally make it to the land of Israel, it says, "Vayochlu me'avur haaretz b'macharat haPesach matzot ukalui be'etzem hayom hazeh," and they ate on the day after the Passover offering. They ate of the produce of the country, unleavened bread and parched grain. Vayishbot haman mimacharat. And the next day the manna stopped, be'ochlam me'avur haaretz, when they ate the actual produce of the land. V'lo haya ot livnei Yisrael man, and the children of Israel had no more manna. Vayochlu mitvuat eretz Canaan b'shana hahi, and they ate from the produce of the land of Canaan in that year. Which is to say that the desert time is not real time. It's not. This part is Edenic. It's not in the world as we live in it. God just gives you food. But when you're going to have to go into the land, you are going to have to work. You're going to have to be farmers. You're going to have to plant. You're going to have to reap. You're going to have to do all the stuff that is involved in food preparation. And I think perhaps that gives us an intersection of your 2 points, because back there in the desert, God takes care of you in an extraordinary, miraculous way. But that's not where you're supposed to end up. You're supposed to end up at Shavuot, when you bring the new grain of the year and you celebrate what you have achieved in your agricultural produce, which feels to me like a real affirmation of human agency, strength, creativity, capability, all of the things that we're adequate to perform for ourselves, which God ultimately wants us to be God's partners and be all those things. So I feel like manna is necessary at stage 1, but not helpful past stage 1.
So what we might say is that manna is a provisional provision. It's meant for a limited amount of time, but matzah is meant for eternity.
So manna is the bread of dependence, and matzah is the bread of independence.
Very nice.
Nicely done.
Okay, very good. Just see, you can get.
So, but note, by the way, you said, Elliot, it's a kind of a proto Shabbat. This is like huge, right? They're not even at Sinai yet, and there is already an expectation that the rhythm includes Shabbat.
It's absolutely fascinating. I think that there's this, that it's really that framing, I think, is the setting of the tone for the whole story, the whole life of Israel is really set on that rhythm, and the rhythm of the week, the rhythm of Parsha, the rhythm of the Parasha Talk. we've come to the conclusion of our time. So it goes by so quickly, like the splitting of the sea. It stays with us, though. Thank you to our listeners, our viewers, devoted people. You know, the Ramah dinner's coming up. Send in a greeting in honor of us for the Parsha Talk. Anyway, we're going to see you next time. Thank you so much for watching and listening. Look forward to seeing you. In the meantime, Shabbat Shalom. Enjoy.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.